Well, hello and welcome back to Rare Classic Cars. Today I thought I would do a top 10 features of classic cars that no longer exist and that we all miss. Now, there obviously are some things that have improved over time. Fuel economy is certainly much better than what you have on these vehicles here, but that doesn't mean that everything is better on new cars. And I will say new cars are generally more reliable as well, although these are certainly easier to fix than modern vehicles. But I wanted to go around and show you live on these three cars, my 1972 Marquis Brougham in the foreground, my 1967 Eldorado back there, and my 1965 Bonneville, what some of these features are of classic cars that we miss. So let's get started at number 10. And at number 10, I'm going to walk over to the Pontiac here, and I'm going to describe something that actually the other two cars don't have, and that is vent windows. Yes, these lovely little vent windows here that you can crank in and out. Sometimes they were power operated. By the way, GM used to make the vent window motors for pretty much the industry. I think Ford and Chrysler both used the vent window motors for the power vent windows. But this was always a nice feature that I thought if you just wanted to crack it and get a little air, you don't have a direct airflow in here. Of course, smokers love this because you could ash your cigarette relatively easily. But it also was nice just to have a little bit of ventilation without your hair blowing around. And that went away when cars started having, as Chevrolet called it, astro ventilation, or the flow-through ventilation system like this 67 Eldorado has, which came about with air conditioning. You can see here in the lock pillar, you have this pressure relief valve vent that vents the air from the cabin out into the outside world. So air basically comes in through the HVAC system and then it comes out through this. And that was very typical during the era. So vent windows went away because I think the designers and engineers thought they created issues with wind whistle and wind noise, which they did to some degree, but I can tell you in this Pontiac, it seals up perfectly and there's no issue. But that Mercury also doesn't have vent windows either. And like I said, that kind of died with air conditioning on many cars. And some vehicles like the GMs, the 1971 GMs, have the vents in the trunk for the flow-through ventilation system. But in general, I think vent windows are something that was actually a pretty nice feature to have, and I think it's unfortunate that they're gone. Let's move on to number 9. At number 9, we have hidden fuel fillers. Boy, it's hard to keep leaves and things off of a black car. So this Eldorado has a bit of a hidden fuel filler. You can see it's disguised here in this little door, not muddying up the body sides. The Bonneville, and I had to park really far rearward so I could get my marquee out as well, has the fuel filler that is behind the license plate, which was typical, but lots of cars in the 50s had the fuel fillers disguised in the tail light or somehow on the driver's side. The 58 Oldsmobile is one of my favorites, where you kind of roll up this piece of trim. The Lincoln Mark II would be another one where this taillight moves over for the fuel filler door. I just thought that was a nice touch, and it looks cleaner. I mean, you don't have a door kind of cluttering the body side, so you get this unadorned, clean, unbroken shape. Ford always loved generally putting the fuel filler doors up here on the full-size cars, which was convenient. It was very easy to fill here as opposed to behind the license plate. But now you got that door. Doesn't this panel look so much nicer like this? By the way, this color is great in the sun. Lincoln called it yellow gold moon dust. I'm forgetting what Mercury called it at the moment. Some glamour metallic paint. But I do miss those little tricks and hidden features. We'll get to more of those in a second that some of these classic vehicles had, like those hidden fuel filler doors. Now at number 8, we have something that's all but gone from many cars today, and that's the front bench seat. It's gone, by and large. Not in some pickups and some other vehicles, but in just a regular old car. You can't find cars with bench seats anymore, which was great for comfort. and for spreading out. You'll notice obviously this Mercury has individual armrests which are richly padded. Yeah, that didn't make the list, but I sure missed that. Why do armrests these days always have such firm padding? I mean, look at this. You can squish it. It's great to rest your elbow on. Your elbow doesn't get tired. You can't find that anymore. But all of these cars have bench seats, even if they look like buckets. This Eldorado obviously has the front bench seat. You could get optional buckets in it with a little center console. And the Bonneville also has a bench seat. Now they package a lot of electronics in the center console. There's so many electronics on cars, so many computers, that center console and the space that is contained within it basically provides a refuge for all of those electronics. And so it's really hard to get rid of it because it's serving a purpose beyond just, what people would say looks cool. But I do miss the bench seats. You, of course, still have rear bench seats, but you don't have the comfort like this and that nice pillowy armrest again in the back. Let's move on to number 7. And at number 7 is something that I'm going to go over to the Bonneville because it really has my favorite example of this. I don't know about anybody else. I am not a fan of the LCD instrumentation. There's nothing like what you can get with good old-fashioned analog gauges. You get the 3 dimensions and all the textures and richness that comes with it. Of course, back then, they also used a lot of bright work on the interiors, which they don't do today, which is a shame. Today, black interiors don't look very good, at least to my eye, because you have all of this just black plastic and little bright work, relatively speaking. But on this car, the black looks great because you have so much bright work that's kind of enhancing the overall trim. Now, like I said, you can't get this effect with the full width LCD displays, and I guess the full width LCD displays are nice, but I don't like that huge iPad in the center stack that most of today's cars have. I mean, even this Eldorado, it just looks richer and more interesting. And the marquee, everything is very square in this car. But I love how you've got the gauges that are kind of inset there within the IP. To me, I would rather have analog gauges over these LCD displays. Let's move on to number 6. At number 6, we're going to look at the Eldorado, and that is the so-called dipped color interiors. Now, a dipped interior means everything is one color, almost like you dipped it in a liquid. And everything here from the seats to the headliner, to the instrument panel, to the carpet and the floor mat is one color. You can't really get this anymore. If you get an interior with color, which is rare to find on its own, often the headliner and the A-pillar trim and the garnish trim is a different color. But back in the day, everything was one color, and it was rich and detailed, and it looked fantastic. Now, most of the time, you just get kind of silvers and grays and all that. Even this brown interior, the brown looks rich, and it's brown everywhere, the same color brown. The headliner, the seat belts, the IP, the carpets, the mats. I wish that you could still get that now, but unfortunately, pretty much your only interior choices now are like a black, a gray, and maybe a tan if you're lucky. Sometimes you can get a red, but it is not this rich red that you see here, and rarely is the steering wheel also colored. On some cars, they even changed the color of the pedal trim and the pedals themselves. They molded the pedals in color, like on some Buicks. I think the 71 Oldsmobile Tornado also had molded in color pedals that matched the interior color, so they weren't just black. Again, gone from today's vehicles, unfortunately. Number 5 is just bright work trim in general. Look at how much chrome these cars have and bright work. Of course, you have the bumper up front, but you also have all the fine details and jewelry, like that cornering lamp. That is a piece of art on this Eldorado. The wheel discs, The mid-century modern block lettering spelling El Dorado. The door handles, now they're just kind of typically plastic and meh. The Cadillac logo, of course. Here you have the tail lamps that have that beautiful piece of bright work at the very edge. I mean, look at that. Sometimes on pickup trucks, you'll get the chrome bumper. On cars, you don't. You just get the body-colored fascia. And I have to kind of blame Pontiac a little bit for that. That fad started, I shouldn't call it a fad, it's still going, started with the Endura bumper. That was kind of the first modern fascia that was body-colored. And after that, it kind of started to trend increasingly toward fascias. But yeah, I miss the front ends that have this bright work. This Mercury has a lot of bright work. The Bromes came with this stainless that trimmed the fenders and the belt line that ran down it. But look at that authoritative front end. You just can't have an authoritative front end with a rubber fascia. Blech. Of course, the window surrounds, the drip rails, you know, all this stuff is kind of gone. This is normally black, or in some cases it's really not visible at all. No more drip rails, in part because of wind whistle and aerodynamics, but very functional. If it's raining, you don't get wet as easily with one of these. So I really miss that bright work. And the bright work even extends to the wipers, and this El Dorado has this beautiful cowl panel. 1 year only, in '68 they would go to the hidden wipers. But I think the '67 is beautiful for a number of reasons, one of which is just this gorgeous cowl panel and this piece of art here that is the vents. Even the wipers are bright. The inside rear view mirror is a piece of bright work. I suppose that was probably not beneficial for the oncoming vehicle in the event you were at an intersection, but nonetheless, looks great. Number 4 is something that each of these cars that I have here exhibits, and that is pillarless hardtops are all but gone from modern day cars, except some expensive cars. There's a Mercedes, I think, hardtop coupe. But what's meant by, when somebody says a hardtop, what does that mean? Well, it means there's no B-pillar. So you put the glass down here and there's no pillar. Now this is really tough to do nowadays because of structural integrity and roof crush, but it lends itself to these open and airy cabins. Notice the Bonneville, there's no B-pillar as well. The Cadillac doesn't have one. I left this little, Cadillac actually called these vent windows, closed and that one open. They retract into the sail panel. And on this car, it's a little crank. The front windows are power, but you had to pay extra on the '67 El Dorado if you wanted power operated vent windows. So you just kind of, let's see, there we go. And it retracts into the sail panel. So no B-pillars. This is great on the 4-doors in particular, the 4-door hardtops, but it gives the cars just a better look. And like I said, it's very functional. This Bonneville doesn't have air conditioning, but the amount of air that you get through the cabin is extreme because you don't have any B-pillar. And you have great sight lines and visibility. I get the roof crush piece where you want a strong roof panel. But what about being able to see and not needing blind spot monitoring and all these electronics just to drive? I mean, sometimes I think that standards are very one-sided. Yes, it's great to have a strong roof panel, but at the expense of visibility? I don't think so. You use visibility every time you turn a corner or come to an intersection. And nowadays, it's actually pretty hard to see out of some vehicles because the pillars are so chunky that you just almost can't. You could lose a car in the pillar. The antithesis of that would be like the '59 GM vehicles with the wraparound front windshield and the wraparound rear backlight, the Vista hardtops. Vista was an appropriate term for them because you really could see out of them very well. And I think it was fantastic. At number 3, we have something that's also gone. That is hidden headlights. Notice that the El Dorado here, only '67, '68 El Dorados had hidden headlamps. And I'm struggling to think, I don't think any other Cadillac ever had hidden headlights. I think that's a true statement. Just the '67 and '8 El Dorado. And of course, Ford loved their hidden headlights, used them for many years. Both are vacuum operated on the Marquis and the Eldorado, but it just gives the car a very authoritative look, and one that you can't get with the headlamps exposed. Now, unfortunately, Ford never trimmed the area behind the headlights here. We'll open it. So it just looks kind of unfinished and awkward. And of course, these are designed to fail open. So if you lose vacuum, they actually fail open. It's the vacuum that holds them down. I wish they would have trimmed those. GM did, Chrysler did, with decent frequency on their vehicles. Ford really never did. And I think they just thought, well, most of the time the headlamps, doors like that are down. But how cool is that? Something that's definitely missed today. The Cadillac headlamp doors retract downward. We'll see if I got enough vacuum here to show you. They'll definitely go down. And see, those are trimmed with some bright work. So it doesn't look unfinished when the headlight doors are open. Still looks pretty good. I just realized this car still has all of its original T3 headlights. Very cool. Let's see if they'll come back up, or if I have to start the car. Oh, it's going to work. Come on, you can do it. Not quite. Let's start it up. It's going to look awkward for the rest of the video. That should be enough. Yep. There we go. Gotta love your Cadillac 429 V8 too. So hidden headlamps gone and well missed. Number 2, smooth transmissions. I don't know about anybody now, but what you think, but these 8-speed, 9-speed, 10-speed automatics, I just hate the continuous hunting, I mean, it's just a complete annoyance. Each of these cars has a relatively simple, reliable, robust 3-speed automatic transmission. And maybe 3's too little. It would be nice if these did have an overdrive. But still, you know, 3 or 4 speeds is plenty, especially when you have the engines that these have under hood, the great torquey V8s. Now everything's got like a turbocharged 4-cylinder, and you really need a lot of gears to keep the engine on the boil and right in the power band. But the way that these transmission shifts, particularly the GM turbohydramatics and the Chrysler torque flights, is sublime. You don't even feel it. Completely imperceptible shifts. Now it's just so present, and when you floor the accelerator, it takes forever for the transmission to kick down. On these cars, you floor the accelerator, you get the surge of power, so long as your accelerator pump and your carburetor is working, and then the transmission kicks down. In some cases, if you have a GM car from 1965 through 67, I believe, on the turbohydromatic 400s and 425s, they have the switch pitch torque converter, so you even get the stall speed increase. The Ford transmissions, I would say, are not as smooth. You can feel the shifts. That was really by design, and they use their own fluid, a Type F fluid. So they do shift more firmly. It's not bad, and it's still just 3 shifts, and they're not constantly hunting. They also kick down when you want it. So I just think the transmissions, I really miss these automatics, and they're really, by and large, they're bulletproof. Whether it's a turbohydromatic 400, a Ford C6, the Chrysler torque flights, you know, they don't have issues by and large. I have many, many classic cars, and I have yet to have a car that's needed a transmission rebuild. In fact, the only thing I've really had to replace on my transmissions is modulator valves, which are just vacuum diaphragms. And yeah, vacuum diaphragms go bad, but those are maybe a 10-minute job at most. And usually what happens is they start shifting late or shifting abruptly or not shifting at all. And almost always, if your fluid is in level position, that just means your modulator is going bad. And so, yeah, that's all I've really had to replace on all these. Transmission pan gaskets and things like that. But nowadays, the modern transmissions, it seems that you got to rebuild them. Once you're over 110, 120,000 miles for some of them, you're running on borrowed time. Not with these. They'll last forever, very heavy duty, and just are great. And that leads me to number one, and that is velvety smooth V8 engines and transmissions with prodigious torque. Now each of these cars, the Cadillac here with its 429 cubic inch V8, the Pontiac with its 389 cubic inch V8, this Marquis with its 460 cubic inch V8. Yes, they do not get good gas mileage, although it's really not horrible. The Bonneville on the freeway, I get about 16, 17 even, believe it or not. Pretty lazy rear end in that car. The Cadillac, I get about 15, I would say, on the freeway. The poor Marquis with its 460, I get about 12 to 13. But these cars are completely unaerodynamic. I mean, in the wind tunnel, you would never do something like this prow on the hood. I mean, this is just a flat surface that's sticking up, a wind catcher. And then, of course, you're going to have all these currents and vortices in between these peaked fenders of the W-shaped front end. So they have horrible aerodynamics. They have 3-speed transmissions without lockup torque converters, have points-based ignition systems. I don't have electronic ignition in any of these cars. Even the Marquis is still, 1972 was still points for Ford. And they get good mileage, I think, for what they are. Big, heavy, unaerodynamic cars. And the great thing about them is you just step on the accelerator, the engines don't rev up hardly at all when you're accelerating normally, and you just move off effortlessly. The transmissions shift so smoothly. It's not like these turbocharged 4-cylinders that sound like a nagging ex-wife or something when you step on the accelerator, and just grates on your ears. You got to wait for the transmission to kick down. I mean, now the transmissions are so wimpy that in order to kick down, what has to happen is they trim the fuel delivery, they cut the ignition timing, then they execute the kick down, then they ramp up the fuel delivery and the ignition timing so that the transmissions can be made with lighter weight components and flimsier components. You didn't have that back in the day. So if you wanted a kick down to be executed at full throttle, you had to have a robust enough transmission that could handle full engine torque. And as a result, there's just not a delay when you step on the accelerator and when the car kind of takes off. The last car, to my imagination, that really did that kickdown execution very well was the early 90s Northstar powered cars. My 94 STS, yes, it does retard ignition timing and fuel delivery, but if you floor the accelerator, it's an instantaneous kickdown and the car leaps forward. Cadillac did an excellent job with that car. The throttle response is, I would say, world class. But after that, they're all the fuel-injected cars, and as transmissions became lighter and had components that were not as robust because they didn't have to handle full engine torque, the delay just became greater and greater. So now the fun thing is, of course, these cars are not as fast as modern cars by any stretch of the imagination, but they're not slow. I mean, the Bonneville's probably a 8-second 0 to 60 car. The Eldorado probably 8.5, 9. It's a little bit heavier. And if I'm get into like a little drag race, an impromptu drag race with somebody, I often beat them because I have a second advantage versus what they have. If I floor the accelerator, I have all my cars tuned appropriately so the accelerator pumps work. I've got a second advantage because my transmission doesn't need to kick down before I have power, and I'm off. And I've already closed the gap before their car speeds up. Not true with electric cars, of course. Electric cars, these kind of are classic electric vehicles in their power band. Instantaneous torque at low RPMs. Electric motors have the same torque at any RPM. So they're great for that. I do love driving electric. I just don't own one because I drive so many miles, it's just not practical. But these cars are almost like classic electric vehicles. Silent, smooth, quiet, whisper silent. If you have the right exhaust system on them, you can't even hear the engine. It's no wonder why people like electric vehicles now, because internal combustion engine cars just kind of became pretty crappy. The engines didn't sound good. The throttle response wasn't great. The experience wasn't what it was. If anybody drove one of these classic vehicles and examined and had a chance to experience what they were like, I don't think that they would have the same perception. Internal combustion cars back in this era, a lot of them were fantastic. Not if you got the economy cars, I would say. But if you got, I mean, even the Pontiac or the Chevrolets of the era, the small block Chevy, fantastic. This 6 cylinders that Chevy had, by and large, fantastic. The inline sixes. So back in the day, a lot of the powertrains were really, really good and robust, easy to fix, repair. Now the hardest part about fixing them is just finding components. But once you find, and reliable components, but once you find them, oftentimes you're in good shape. So what do you think? I probably should put the styling, but that's so generic. I do miss the creased sheet metal. I mean, this Eldorado, the GM styling term for this was that Bill Mitchell, the vice president of design, wanted Cadillacs to have all these creases, like the crease in a man's trousers. And it has that. You notice that comparing it, the Bonneville has creases, but there's this little fillet here. It kind of rounds off, and then it goes to a convex surface. Here, this just comes to a point and a crease. There's no fillet. There's nothing here. It's just like that crease in a man's pants. Of course, here you have the little filleted surface, but again, very hard edge on the Cadillac. I really miss that. You can't do this. This is so expensive. I can't even imagine how many stampings, how many, let's say, presses it would take to form that hood. This actually, by the way, is a 2-piece hood on this Eldorado that's seamed down the middle, disguised by this molding. So this hood is done with 2 different blanks as opposed to 1. The 71 Eldorado, which has an even larger hood, was a single-piece hood. But you just don't get all these creases anymore. I mean, the deck lid on this too, or the quarter, this rear quarter to stamp this had to give manufacturing engineers a nightmare to get the metal flowing appropriately. And the deck lid probably did too. So I hope you enjoyed that. Put a comment in the comment section with what you think. I should also say the air conditioning systems, aside from the styling, I miss the air conditioning systems with super cold refrigerant. Man, these cars are cold. Except that Eldorado, because it needs a new suction throttling valve. And they don't make them anymore, and they don't rebuild them. So I just got an NOS one. I got to put that on. Otherwise, the AC system's great. You have to tap it with a hammer in order to get the cold air to come out. But wow, the air conditioning systems in these are great and over-spec'd. And I think now, maybe it was too cold. Some people complain. I love freezing cold air on a hot summer day, blowing right in my face. And you certainly get that with these cars, most particularly the GM cars. The Ford by this era wasn't bad. The late 60s Fords and before you got to the early 70s, I would say the Ford air conditioning systems were okay. They could keep up, but by this point, they were very frigid as well. Thanks again for watching. And put a comment in the comment section with what your favorite features of classic cars are that no longer exist.